Welcome indeed to Live Wire. This is a new program on CSTv network, and I'm very happy to be bringing the first episode with one of the more prominent public speakers of the Caribbean, one who have always admired and followed, Attorney General of Guyana, the Honorable Anil Nandlall. Welcome to our program. Welcome to Live Wire.
Richard, and thank you for accommodating me and inviting me to be part of this program. And I want to take this opportunity to extend to you and your viewers and listeners a very prosperous and happy 2023.
Well, it's our first interview since you in office as Attorney General, so I really feel honored to have you on our program and welcome back to the airways of Caribbean Showtime and Shabnam Radio.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we have so much to discuss in this half hour. I wanted to start off first by getting straight into it with an issue or question on the topic that everybody is talking about, oil. Oil and gas discovery has catapulted Guyana fortunes. In the year 2023, the Caribbean region is only expected to record 1.3% of GDP growth rate. Guyana, however, is expected to record a 30% growth rate, the highest in the region. Wanted to ask you what legal mechanism that you and your government is utilizing to ensure the fortune is not squandered and it's left for the future generation.
Thank you very much, Richard, and that's a very important and interesting question. Um, so you pointed to growth rate, and you have made a connection between the oil and gas sector and our rising growth rate. But I want to point out that not only is our economy growing in the oil and gas sector, but we are also growing in the non oil and gas sector at perhaps the fastest rate also in the Caribbean. No doubt there's a connection between the two, but we must always maintain or recognize growth in the oil and gas sector as well as growth outside of the oil and gas sector. Why that distinction is important? It's because we are diversifying our economy, utilizing and using resources derived from the oil and gas sector. We are not making the mistake made by so many other oil producing territories of over concentrating in that one sector. Rather, we are using the proceeds of that sector, recognizing that it is a sector that is exhaustive, and ensuring that proper investments are made in the other sectors so that the dependency is not sole and exclusive, but rather spread along different economic activities, creating different revenue streams, more particularly in sectors that are even more sustainable. For example, in Guyana, our most important sector is the agro sector because we have an abundance of land, we have great weather patterns and conditions, and we have the ability to feed not only Guyana but the entire Caribbean and to play a pivotal role in terms of food security for this part of the world, not region. Recognizing that, we are ensuring that we invest in sectors outside of the oil and gas sector. Also, importantly, we are addressing the main issue that has perhaps affected economic advancement in Guyana, and that is the cost of energy. So we are not only concentrating on the oil and gas sector, but also in making energy, producing energy at a lower cost, exploring not only resources in the oil and gas sector, but in other sectors as well, including hydro and wind and solar. So we have a full national platform that addresses all the developmental concerns of our country. Now, you have asked me a particular question: what are the legal mechanism in place? Now, economic advancement cannot take place in a vacuum. Economic advancement must take place in an infrastructure that is recognized by law and that is based upon law. So we are in the process of creating that important regulatory framework for the oil and gas sector, and we have to build from ground zero in that regard because it's a brand new sector. And then also we have to create the requisite national infrastructure legally that will permit the type of development to take place along the trajectory that we are planning to take our country. So, first of all, the regulatory framework, we are working on that in terms of creating a new petroleum law. We have a Petroleum Act that was coined and enacted long before we became an oil producer. So it is completely out of sync with the current realities in Guyana. Then we had to install the local content legislation. Why? Because we felt unless we regulate the way resources are spent and the way employment is done and the way investments are done in this sector, Guyanese, because they are untrained in the sector, because the sector is new, and because we don't have an antecedent of resources in this sector in terms of human resources and other infrastructure resources, if we don't regulate the sector and activities in the sector, Guyanese can easily become pushed out of the sector because of the fact that the operators in the sector, the licensees in particular, ExxonMobil, has 100 years of international experience covering every aspect of the industry. So they have historical linkages with powerful companies across the globe offering every possible service in the sector. Now, if we don't regulate that sector in Guyana and we allow all these linkages to come and all these other companies from all over the world to come into Guyana and continue to operate with ExxonMobil without any form of regulation, Guyanese will have no part to play in the sector. They would have been pushed out completely. Hence, the implementation of a law that mandates the hiring of Guyanese and the hiring of Guyanese companies, both in the realm of employment as well as for the provision of goods and services. And the law is now public knowledge, and it was well publicized, so the requirements are well known. Before one can operate in the oil and gas sector, one must satisfy the requirements of the Act. You must be a Guyanese national or a Guyanese company, or you must be partnering with a Guyanese company where the Guyanese company must own 51% of the shares and about 85% of the management of the company. Of course, that is not so for every sector, because while we want to push nationalism and national participation, and would like to ensure that Guyanese enjoy their due patrimony, we can't do so to the exclusion of other players in the sector where Guyanese can't produce or Guyanese do not have the resources that are requisite. We have to strike that delicate balance while we want to promote local participation in the industry. We also must recognize that local participation may not be enough, and there are sectors, there are areas of activities that we simply don't have the resources in Guyana to address. Therefore, in those areas, you you bring in foreign nationals and you bring in foreign resources. And there's a schedule in the law that addresses that. The other important statutory framework that we have put into place is how are we going to receive and how are we going to expend the resources that we are getting from the oil industry. That is the revenue. So there are models in the world because you can get an avalanche of revenue from the oil and gas industry that can put an economy into tailspin and has caused problems all over the world. So there are international regulatory practices that have been coined and evolved that guide or act as guiding principles for oil producing countries. There is, for example, the creation of a sovereign wealth oil fund. And we have done that in the form of an account. And revenues from the oil and gas industry goes into that fund. And there is a law that creates the fund, and that law also regulates how monies are withdrawn from that fund and for what purposes they are withdrawn and are spent. And there are a series of checks, balances, and oversight to ensure that there is accountability and transparency in the receipt and expenditure of revenues generated from the oil and gas sector. For example, monies coming into the sovereign wealth fund must go straight into the consolidated fund and must do so and can only come out of the consolidated fund when there is, it has to come out of the consolidated fund through a parliamentary process. And the monies, as they are moving within these various accounts, they are publicly declared. And the law establishes a list of purposes for which the monies are to be used. And they are all related to national development and in the public interest. And then there are layers of oversight within the legislation that allows for non-governmental, non-political players to oversight the functioning of this infrastructure that regulates the inflow, the receipt, and expenditure of the oil revenue. Also, the Auditor General audits all these transactions on an annual basis, and the law allows him to retain any international auditor to aid and assist him in the discharge of his functions should he feel that he needs international expertise. So those are
Well,
a few
on
quick
that note,
things that I can talk about quickly.
yeah, and that's a lot. I know we could dig deeper into some of the other aspects that would relate to fellow Guyanese living abroad. But I wanted to move on. You touch on making sure that Guyanese are involved in the process and that outsiders wouldn't be overwhelmed, hired into the country and into that sector. What are you doing and your government? Because I remember back in 1976, since 1976, Guyana have received free education from nursery to university. It was your government, I believe, had put a stop to free education at university level, and that was free when Guyana was a poor, undeveloped country. Now, with the newfound wealth, would we see free education for Guyanese at the university level?
Well, first of all, in the 70s, the period that you are referring to, we had a declared policy of free education from nursery to university. And that essentially led to a collapse of the education sector. And education, though free, the standard had fallen to an extent that we were barely able to provide spaces in our schools for the number of children. And we had a large number of school dropouts, etc., etc. But that's a whole different conversation altogether. we are pursuing policies and programs that are designed and dedicated to ensure that the proceeds of oil and the revenue generated from the oil and gas sector are enjoyed by every single Guyanese. In fact, the programs that we have employed so far in the utilization and expenditure of oil revenues have been recognized and applauded by the IMF, the World Bank, and the IDB in recent international reports. They lauded the way that Guyana has used the revenue generated from the oil and gas sector in targeted help to different socially, economically challenged components of our society. And that is the way that we will continue to use the oil and gas money, quite apart from the developmental and transformational projects that they will be used to finance, but at a social level and at every aspect of the social level, in terms of healthcare, in terms of education, in terms of provision of water, provision of electricity, salaries and wages, pensions, and all benefits spreading across national life from a social perspective. They are all going to be addressed in the fairest and most equitable manner. Already we have begun to speak about free education at the level of the University of Guyana. But we have to ensure that we finance these endeavors in a sustainable way, because you can have deep and far-reaching ramifications at a macroeconomic level, leading to inflation, etc. Or even reach at a stage where, if, let us say, the oil and gas sector is still a volatile sector on the world market, the price can fluctuate at any time, as it has done over the past 5 or more years. Trinidad, your country of birth, has experienced that and can tell you how it has been at the mercy of the oil and gas market and the fluctuation that takes place in that market. So one has to plan in a sustainable way, having regard to all those factors, and don't, project too much into one sector, and don't do it ahead of time, but await at the opportune moment and do it in a manner that is sustainable, having regard to all the facts and circumstances prevailing at the time, including factors which are outside of our control. For example, the way the price of oil may fluctuate on the in the international market. Recall also, Richard, that we are not, at least at this stage, we are not really selling oil. We are just receiving royalty. So a lot of what happens in the world market, etc., we don't necessarily gain from it. But it's a factor that we must always remain alive to. So I hope I would have answered that question.
Well, yes, in a bit, because I'm thinking about our trained workforce in Guyana. They should be trained and educated, and at a tertiary level or university level would add some access to that such training. But want to move on because we are only allotted a half hour today, and I could sit for an hour or two with you because the amount of questions that I would like to ask, and I know you're not short on answers. Speaking about ExxonMobil, there was a lot of talk that the deal with ExxonMobil and its partners has lopsided, and perhaps the former government should have done better. Legally, can the government scrap the contract? And part two to that question is, what is your government plans to address future contracts?
Before I get to that, I omitted to mention the government's university scholarship program, in which we are enrolling thousands of students per year and funding their education by way of correspondence courses and internet platform courses from universities across the globe. Right? So that is free of cost. Government is funding that. But get to your question. Yours truly, and in fact our entire party, while we were in opposition, were extremely critical of the contract to which you are referring. I myself may have been the one who used the phrase lopsided first to describe that contract, and that phrase caught on and now is permanently associated with the contract. ExxonMobil, Richard, is an international company that is engaged in business for profits. ExxonMobil got an extraordinarily good deal. It was a contract executed by two parties that are qualified or who are qualified to enter into contract. They did so consciously, they did so transparently, meaning that there was no hidden act of coercion or duress being exercised by one party over another. And they enter into a contract which, for all intent and purposes, though lopsided, is valid. Now, a contract, as you would know, can only be altered by consent. Now, if we can get ExxonMobil to come back to the table, that's good. But what people don't understand is that, in a free market system and in an international atmosphere where we must respect sanctity of contracts and respect bargains, then what do you do? What we have promised is that new contracts being entered into going forward will be different. And that's why, unlike our predecessor, we have a number of international law firms advising the government on the oil and gas industry. I, as Attorney General, don't for one moment pretend to understand the complex legal issues and the peculiar legal principles and doctrines associated with this industry, especially having regard to the fact that you're dealing with a company that has 100 years experience and that has the financial wherewithal to employ and retain the best lawyers on planet Earth. I am aware of that. We are conscious of that. Hence, we have not one, but more than one law firms of international standing advising the government on these matters. Our predecessors felt that they were qualified and competent to do so, and perhaps that may have been the reason why we ended up with the contract that we did.
Well, I wanted to ask you also, as Attorney General, your government, the PPP Civic, has promised constitutional reform. You are now in your third year as government. Explain the process and why does it seem to be taking longer to accomplish this task?
All right, and that's a very important question. And I am very properly poised to answer that because I am the subject minister in respect of constitutional reform. Now, not only did the PPP promise constitutional reform as a manifesto promise, all the political parties campaigned on a promise to pursue constitutional reform. In fact, it has been an outstanding promise on the manifesto of every political party over the past 2 decades. When the opposition controlled the parliament, they took possession. That's after the 2011 elections. Remember, we were in a minority government. They controlled the National Assembly. They campaigned heavily on constitutional reform. They took control of the Constitutional Reform Committee of the National Assembly, but delivered nothing. They won the 2015 election. Again, they promised constitutional reform. They took control of the Standing Committee on Constitutional Reform in the National Assembly, but did nothing for constitutional reform. We are there now, and we have already put a bill in the National Assembly, and in the bill, we have projected our promise of how we will execute constitutional reform. We said that we are going to do it, first of all, through a multi-broad-based commission comprising of 50% politicians and 50% civil society. The 50% politicians will come from the parliamentary parties, 25% government, 25% opposition. So you have a balanced political faction of the commission. And then civil society organization, completely divorced from politics, they will constitute the 50%. And they will nominate their own representatives, not government choosing who their nominees are going to be. We said that we will put that in a law, and we will put in the law that this exercise must be done by this commission holding public consultations across the length and breadth of our country. So nobody can accuse us of politicizing the process. That is the formula that we used in 1999 to 2000 when the PPP was in government. Again, we put that law in the parliament. It was sent to a select committee because significantly, Richard, your viewers must understand that constitutional reform of worth cannot be achieved until you have bipartisan support in the parliament. Because every important provision of our constitution that may require change requires a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly before there can be a change. None of the political parties enjoy that majority in the National Assembly. So any provision that needs to be changed will require support or a consensus between the opposition and the government. When we were in the select committee with this bill, we had to virtually drag the opposition to get them to contribute. If you would recall, I chaired that committee, and I am on public record for the past 2 years criticizing the opposition, either for not attending the committee or when they come to the committee, they are not in a position to make a constructive contribution. And as I said, it would be imprudent to proceed unilaterally on constitutional reform because you need the support of both sides. That stalled the process a bit, well, not a bit, but a lot. But eventually, a few months ago, the bill was passed in the National Assembly. It came out of the Constitutional Reform Committee of the National Assembly consensually after great delay on the part of the opposition. Unfortunately, again, when it reached the floor of the parliament, though they supported it in the standing committee, when it reached the floor of the parliament, they did not turn up. So, but it was passed. But as I said, it enjoyed their support in the standing committee. I am hoping shortly, early this year, as the bill is now law, the president will now, because it's under his hand, to appoint the commission. And I'm hoping that that will be done very early this year. as soon as budget is concluded, because it's an expensive exercise and it is budgeted for in the 2023 budget. As soon as that budget is passed, the president ought to appoint the commission, and the commission ought to begin its work. Just as another quick update, I have already identified, or the government has already identified, the building that will accommodate the commission, and the building has already been furnished in anticipation of the commission being appointed.
You know, you mentioned every political party have been putting on their manifesto about constitutional reform, like to Trinidad and Tobago, which I follow very closely. However, with the opposition in government at that time, somebody always sidestepping. What about the law society, the publishers of, the editors of newspaper, intellectuals who could contribute? Why don't they hold to account the opposition or people who have been sidestepping and putting the country's and the nation interests below their list?
In a vibrant democracy, those voices are important. We in our government, we welcome critical, constructive oversight. We believe that that is important to our democracy and to the advancement of the development of our society, the evolution of our society. We have a Bar Association of Guyana, which is called the Law Society in Trinidad. It's quite vibrant, it's quite alive, and it does make public pronouncements. The newspapers have been covering this issue, and of course, more can be done, and more voices can emanate from civil society, because that is what makes a democracy strong and resilient. And as I said, we welcome that type of constructive scrutiny and constructive engagement from every conceivable component of our society.
Well, moving along, and with your permission, I think this interview could go a little bit longer. We are okay for time. How about you? You okay to spend a little more time with us?
Yes, certainly.
Okay. On my program, the opposition leader of Guyana was on my program last year, and he had accused the government of discrimination in the use of state resources. Is this the case?
I spend every Tuesday night 1 hour on a television program that is transmitted on the social media Facebook platform, addressing issues such as allegations of racial and ethnic discrimination. Just last Tuesday, I spent 30 minutes or thereabouts of a 1 hour program addressing that matter. At one time, an organization wanted to hold a conference in Guyana alleging apartheid. I wrote an article that was about 2,000 words in length, in demonstrating that constitutionally, institutionally, and legally, discrimination is outlawed and not permissible. And secondly, I have interrogated the allegations of discrimination, and I believe that I have established beyond any rational doubt that they are unfounded and they are without merit. I have been saying that I have been doing it, but I should use the collective. Our government has been doing it. Our president has been doing it. The general secretary of our party, who is the vice president of the government, has been doing it. Every leader and minister of our government has been doing it. And why is it, Richard? We have an ethnic relations commission in Guyana. We have constitutional court. We have signed on to every major international human rights treaty across the Western Hemisphere. These treaties have institutions within them to address the issue of racial and ethnic discrimination. All these treaties protect against racial and ethnic discrimination. We have signed on every single one of them. So we have the Ethnic Relations Commission, we have the Constitutional Court, because ethnic and racial discrimination is a constitutional wrong. And as I said, we have signed on to the United Nations, we have signed on to OAS, we have signed on to every available treaty in this hemisphere which prohibits ethnic and racial discrimination, and they have tribunals within them that will entertain cases that are brought to them alleging racial and ethnic discrimination. Why a single one of these cases has never been filed? Why are they speaking to themselves? They're saying, for example, that the way we distribute cash grant is done in a discriminatory way. I have said to them, could you produce the people who are claiming that they have been discriminated against? Everyone in Guyana has a cell phone, my friend. Everyone in Guyana, or 95% of our population, is on Facebook. We have per capita perhaps the highest concentration of Facebook members, for want of a better word, in the Caribbean. Are you telling me that they can't find one person to put on the camera to say, I have not received my cash grant because I am an Afro-Guyanese? Why they can't do that? That's all we are saying. They are saying that we are giving out assistance to the farmers in a discriminatory manner. And we have asked them, there are criteria that you have to satisfy. Whether you are Indo-Guyanese, whether you are Afro-Guyanese, whether you are Chinese or Amerindians. And it is the criteria, is based upon the criteria that you get, is based upon what you lose that you get the compensation. I see they have done an analysis now of award of contracts. And they are saying that Indo-Guyanese get a larger proportion of contractual awards. Now, my friend, contracts are awarded in Guyana by a law, the Public Procurement Act. The Public Procurement Act lays down a process of public bidding and a competitive bidding system. The public servants, government is not involved, the public servants are randomly selected to assess the bids that are received. The bids are open publicly and then go to assessment. Public servants, 85% of whom are Afro-Guyanese, are assessing those bids. And then they go to the tender board with a recommendation. That is the process, my friend. It is in the law. It's a public one. All the bids are advertised publicly. The results of every award is published on a website. But they are looking at the output. So, my friend, if 100 yellow persons bid for a contract, you want one red man to win? You have to look at who is bidding. If you don't buy a ticket for the lotto, you can't win the lottery. So by looking at what the awards are, and then looking at the racial composition of the awardees, and making a conclusion that's racial discrimination is deeply flawed. As I have said, we have Afro-Guyanese dominating the police force. Is it that we are discriminating against Indo-Guyanese and that's why they are not in the force? Afro-Guyanese dominate the army. Is it that the government is discriminating against Indo-Guyanese and that's why they are not in the army? We have Afro-Guyanese dominating the public sector, the public service or the civil service. Is it that our government is discriminating against Indo-Guyanese and that's why they are not there? The truth of the matter is that people historically and I suppose sociologically and ancestrally are attracted to different areas of endeavors in human life. Afro-Guyanese historically and presently seem to be more attracted to the public sector, to the discipline services. Indo-Guyanese seem to be historically and ancestrally be more attracted to the economic sector, the financial sector, the private sector. So, who you want to win the bids if one ethnicity dominate their participation in the competition? Is that ethnicity will come out? So I have asked them, let us sit in a public debate and deal with these issues. But they would not want to do that. They speak to themselves only. Invite them to a debate and they don't turn up. Because we have all the raw statistical data available to show. And we will open our government and any aspect of governmental business to public scrutiny, in particular in respect of the allegation of racial discrimination. Look, quite recently, some squatters, I think 7 of them, are squatting on state lands in the path of a national highway that is being constructed.
That's the situation.
At
That's the
Mocha.
situation in Mocha, is it?
Yes. Now, our government is negotiating with landowners across the length and breadth of Guyana to publicly acquire land for developmental public purposes. We are doing so for the Demerara Harbor Bridge, a mega project. We are doing so for a road across the west bank of the Demerara River. We are doing so for the gas to shore pipeline, dozens of miles. Now, we did so for the Berbice Bridge. Now, these are both Afro and Indo-Guyanese. Most of them are Indo-Guyanese. And we have negotiated with them and paid them adequate compensation. And these are people who own the land. Here is 6 squatters. The government can establish by record that the government has engaged them since 2008. Since 2008. Engage them again in 2021. Give them homes, land and houses. Pay them to move. Help them move. Give them land separately for their cattle. Provide them with compensation to the tune of $260 million. We have not even paid that level of compensation to people who have owned the lands. But it so happened that they are Afro-Guyanese, it becomes a racial issue. It becomes a racial issue. And that is the kind of opposition that you have in Guyana. Whenever they see a combustible situation, they come with a gallon of gasoline and they throw it to explode. They want a racial combustion in the country.
Well, we have seen where that combustion led your country a few years back. But I wanted to move ahead. There's so much that I want to address apart from national security, the police force, etc. But today I want to ask you, before you leave us, based on the Attorney General report, particularly during the previous government, I've read that several contracts which were signed, monies were paid to contractors. The government has been unable to recover these money and concluded as delivery as per contract. The CCTv cameras is one that I read recently. What is being done to ensure that the taxpayers get value for the money and that we can hold these contractors accountable for the monies they receive?
So I am happy that you have raised that question because only this morning I received a letter from the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Public Works detailing the latest litany of instances identified. You said the Attorney General just now, it's the Auditor General, identified by the Auditor General in his report and is asking me for legal guidance on the way forward. I have already assembled today self a unit of lawyers within the AG chambers who will dedicatedly deal with that litany of complaints to which the Permanent Secretary of Public Works wrote to me on this morning. But before that, the Attorney General has been suing as the cases are made available to him. So I have sued, for example, former Minister Patterson and the public officers involved in relation to some scales, motion scales, that they fully paid for, although the contract required them only to pay. First of all, they did not go to tender, as they are required to do under the law. They signed a contract that required them to pay 10% and to pay the balance when the scale is recovered. They pay 100%. So it was not publicly tendered. They pay 100% and never receive the scale. That matter is ongoing in the High Court. I have several cases. You talk about the camera, the CCTv camera. The company that they bought the CCTV camera from, when I did my inquiries, the company no longer exists. It went into liquidation. So I don't think that sum is recoverable. We don't even know where the people are. In the agri sector, there are a host of contracts that they entered into, spending hundreds of millions of dollars in buying irrigation pumps, for example, and none of them are working. I have constant engagements with the suppliers trying to rectify the contracts that are in breach, clearly in breach. And these are hundreds of millions of dollars in relation to critical pumps. They bought a whole set of machineries in the agro sector for D&I work, drainage and irrigation work, that are not non-functional or are substandard. At Panama, for example, I'm dealing with a particular situation where they took the rice farmers' rice here and sold it to Panama and never even bothered to look for the money. Over, I don't know how many million US dollars outstanding there. Rice farmers' money. The rice farmers are languishing up to now here. These are the outstanding things that we don't even speak about. We don't even speak about as a government, that we are enduring and trying to address all compliments of our predecessors, who are now masquerading as paragon of virtues. If you hear them speak now, you would not believe that these are the same fellas who were in government just 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, as we get set to wrap up, I wondered if you could address, and if I might not be aware or privy to some of the changes your government and your office has made that is immediately affecting or will soon affect the normal man. Land transportation, requesting of deed and speeding up process. If you could talk to our viewers who live abroad and tell them what are some of the steps that are being taken by you and your office and your government to make everyday life and business transaction easier.
That's an unfair question to ask me at the end of the program, because that by itself will require an entire program. So our Minister of Finance will be reading the budget Monday. And in that budget, there is going to be a comprehensive regime of measures directed to making life in Guyana at every level easier. Now, I don't wish to preempt the Minister of Finance, but what have we done over the past 2.5 years since we have been there? It is a fact of public notoriety that over 200 new taxes or new fees were implemented by the previous administration. We promised to reverse each and every one of them, and I believe we have completed that exercise. We have given during the COVID period several COVID grants to not only to the workers involved, but to every category of Guyanese, including every household. Then we return the school cash grant voucher, and we increased it. We reintroduced the vouchers, the uniform vouchers for our school children. We have had a series of increases in salaries and wages across the public sector. We have increased pensions, and there are a whole menu of assistance in the form of cash grants that we have given to every category of persons and workers in our country, with particular emphasis on the poor and the disadvantaged. In terms of making doing business, or making business easier, there are a whole series of transactions at every level of the governmental apparatus that is taking place now to achieve that objective. So we have just passed a single window bill that will revolutionize the way that people apply for building permits, fire permits, housing permits, etc. Whereby you go to one office, you submit all the documentations, and they're processed by the different agencies, and you come back at that office at a particular period, and you collect either your refusal or approval. We have put in the law that wherever an agency is required to give its no objection or objection, it must do so within a period of time. If it is not done, if it doesn't address the matter, one way or another, the application will be deemed to be granted. Right now, we have several consultants working on several pieces of legislation to address similar matters across the state apparatus. We are putting e-payment laws into place to allow for the use of plastic and for there to be e-payments done across the public and government sector. Our housing program is second to none in the Caribbean. We have given out tens of thousands of house lots and houses since we have come back into government, right across the length and breadth of Guyana. We have repaired, I don't know how many hundred roads across Guyana. And of course, I can talk about the mega projects. So, I mean, I can continue to speak, but I don't want to rant and rave, giving more information that can be absorbed. And I don't want to do so in a haphazard way either. But trust me,
Well,
Richard, our country is on a transformational trajectory, and it is. I mean, you must be seeing. I don't know whether you've been here recently, but I'm sure that you're seeing images on the social media, and you're seeing images elsewhere, and you would recognize from your distance the transformation that is taking place infrastructurally, economically, commercially, and socially right across the landscape of our country.
well, this program was designed to connect the diaspora with their politicians, their intellectuals, and bring us and refresh us with some knowledge and hope. I hope we were able to do that today. I wanted, seeing that this is our very first program, and having you, our very esteemed guest, on today's program, I wanted to take it away a little bit from the politics and your official office a little bit, if you would allow me.
Certainly.
Mr. Nandlall, I've heard you on many occasions address audiences, brothers and sisters. I remember after the last election where your party was not successful, you came on the radio program, Shabnam Radio, and you mentioned that your party was out of touch with the grassroots. I have seen right after that where you took to the street, attending funeral, walking through the marketplace, hugging people on the street randomly for Christmas, etc. This is the person that I have been watching and somehow know a little bit about. But there's so much that we don't know. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're married. I'm not sure if you have kids or not. If you could tell us a little bit what village you come from, your beginnings a little bit. In just 2 minutes, I just want to
Okay.
pry.
I was born on the east coast of Demerara in a village by the name of Monrepos. And then I moved to Annandale, where I grew up and lived until I became a lawyer. And then I moved to Georgetown. Um, I I am married. I have no children as yet. That's a work in progress. I'm a Hindu, as you know. Um, and my desire in life is to make a difference for the people of my country, and to make a difference in my country and in the direction that I would like to see my country go. And I am grateful to my party and to all those who have made it possible and who have afforded me and provided me with the opportunity to realize this dream. Many persons have helped me and guided me along the way. My party in particular has afforded me the exposure, the opportunity, and I'm grateful to the leadership and members of my party. And that's the road that I intend to travel for the rest of my life. I like what I do. That's the most important thing. To me, this thing is not work. It is part of, this is my life. Um, I have made some investments in my personal life, and they have been good. So, I can fully concentrate on public service, and that's what I enjoy doing. And as I said, it's not a job. It's what I would like to do, and I'm fortunate to have been able to do it, and do it at a reasonably high level with some degree of independence, which I treasure. But we are a strong collective in our party and in our government, and we act in a consensual manner, and we all have a common vision, a vision gifted to us by the great Dr. Chetty Jagan, and we hope not to depart from that vision. In fact, every day we may alter that vision a little to ensure that it remains extant and valid, because we live in a changing, dynamic society, and you can't have a stagnant vision. You have to have a vision that is evolving to meet the exigencies of a changing and dynamic people and society, and we are doing that in our party, and at a personal level, I am part and parcel of that process. Both, I can't divorce my person from that role, because they are one and the same. And it gives me great pleasure to connect with the people on the ground in particular. And you said that you were observing me during while we were in opposition, and I hope that you are observing that in government. I continue, and we continue to do the same. Every day, if you look at the social media in particular, you will see one of our ministers somewhere in the country addressing people's concerns. And that is the policy, and that is the program of our government. And we are fortunate to have a young, vibrant, visionary president in the form of Dr. Irfan Ali, and his leadership has been inspiring.
Well, I want to thank you very much. And again, this is a historic moment for CSTv. As you know, we are now 24/7 and broadcasting every single day. And this is a program, and I was honored to have you as my first guest. I'm very pleased to have you as my first guest. You're one of the few politicians that I truly admire. Having said that, I would like to say thank you for making your time available to us. Hope that you will be willing to do so soon, maybe after the debate of the budget, etc. There's so much I had to ask you about the security in Guyana, the police force, etc. But if you would allow me to be interviewed again, I would love to have you back.
Certainly, and I'll try to have our minister responsible for national security on your program as well. My colleague, the Honorable Robson Ben. It would be interesting to speak to him first, rather, on that matter, because he's the subject minister. But of course, I am available to you, Richard. We have always been in contact. There has been some hiatus, and I hope that we correct that now. And let's stay in touch, and I'm available at your convenience.
Thank you very much. Has been speaking to Honorable Minister, the Attorney General for the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Honorable Anil Nandlall, and this is our first program. Watch out for many, many more on Live Wire. I would be remiss if I did not say a special thank you to those behind the scene who made it possible. On our end here, my team, my staff, thank you, Tony Maroney and others. And in Guyana, I want to say thank you very much to all those, and you know who you are, for your assistance. God bless you, and thank you for watching.